I mean, leaders resist change because they're human, and and as humans, we're not really hardwired to love change.
In this episode of my podcast, Relentless Life on Your Terms, I'm joined from the United States by Nancy Murphy, who runs CSR Communications and Intrapreneur Influence Lab. As she teaches intrapreneurs to work within an entrepreneurial environment and how you can adapt change to your business and be more resilient in your business. Remember, if you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, share and like so don't miss an episode of Relentless Life on Your Terms. Thank you. So welcome to my podcast, Relentless Life on Your Terms. I am joined with Nancy Murphy. Nancy, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Glad to be here.
All the way from the States, so I feel very honored to have you on our show.
I'm very honored to be here.
So Nancy, I want to talk to you a little bit about your career to date. You work with a company called CSR Communications and also Intrapreneurs Influence Lab. Tell us a bit about both.
Well, CSR Communications is the company I started about 7 years ago, and we work with internal change agents in everything from strategy development, communication and messaging, board development for those nonprofit organizations and philanthropic foundations. And many of the clients that we work with are intrapreneurs. So those folks leading transformative change within their organizations. And I was noticing that so many of them were coming to us with the same challenges. And because communication is a big part of our work, I created the Intrapreneurs Influence Lab to really teach those leaders influence and persuasion skills so that they could realize their vision for change faster with less frustration and resistance.
I'll ask a question then, Nancy. Now, for everyone's heard the term multiple times, entrepreneur. Now, you just referred to an intrapreneur. Now, for our listeners who don't know what that means, can you just tell us the difference?
Absolutely. So entrepreneurs are those people who disrupt systems and industries by going outside the traditional organizations, starting their own business or social enterprise or organization. Intrapreneurs disrupt industries and organizations and systems from within. So they're the ones working within established companies, organizations, nonprofits, charities to make them more equitable, innovative, effective, efficient. So they're bringing those entrepreneurial skills but to the large systems and organizations that are, that have that reach, that scope, that scale, that are already in many places having an impact. And can they just have that impact better?
So you're basically saying like an entrepreneur is a business owner, what we refer to them in Australia, someone who starts a business, innovates a product, a service, and goes out. That intrapreneur is maybe like I call them team members. Some people call people employees, but I like to say team members because a lot more effective. And also it's nicer to be referred to as a team member and a colleague as opposed to an employee, I feel. But for the lack of a better term, it's an employee, an intrapreneur, someone who works within a business, maybe a 2IC, a CFO, a COO, anyone that can affect the change, the efficiencies, the profitability of a business, someone like that. Would that be correct?
Correct. They tend to be people who have some formal authority within the organization, because if we're talking about, pretty significant change in a company or in an organization, they need to have the authority to do that. But it doesn't have to be the CEO or the CFO, but typically it's someone with some formal leadership role.
Executive level, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Now, does every employee or team member have an intrapreneur characteristics in your opinion? So does every executive have an intrapreneur characteristic? Sorry.
No. And not everyone has the inclination or the skill set. So some people might have the inclination. They see inefficiencies or inequities in the status quo, and they want to shake things up. They may not have the skills. Other people may have the influence and persuasion skills, but they want to use them to enhance the status quo or to just do more of what they're already doing. So those intrapreneurs who succeed are really those who have the inclination, and this is not easy work, right? In some cases, we're talking about that metaphor of trying to turn the ship. It can be a slow process where you can feel very isolated, feel like you're kind of beating your head against the wall. So it takes a really special person who wants to kind of buck the status quo inside a bureaucracy and who has the skills to be able to do that effectively.
So just on that, I guess for like an intrapreneur is someone who necessarily will operate better with the structure around them and they can bring their skill set up, because starting a business from scratch is a totally different skill set to be able to work in a business and make it more successful because you have the tools and the requirements around you. So I always used to say to people, and it's like being good as a team member or being good as a manager at something. They're two different skill sets, which is the same as an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur that can start anything from scratch, but you might not be able to succeed unless you have the structure, the infrastructure around you, like a smart entrepreneur. And for some people, they don't want to run a business. I've got some fantastic executives here that don't want nothing to do with running a business. They just want to be a part of something great, bigger than themselves. They can help serve the community, sell a good product or service, and they don't want the stress of having to run a business and have to be consumed with everything about that business.
Right. And I mean, I think we need both types of leaders, obviously. So many of the leaders that I work with are ones who are really trying to have a significant social impact. So even inside a large company, for example, I might work with the chief sustainability officer or the corporate responsibility team or the diversity and inclusion lead. And so, from their perspective, if what they're trying to do is eliminate single use plastics or encourage more plant based meals in their food service or reduce carbon emissions, if they're able to do that at the scale of a global company with thousands of clients and tens of thousands of employees or team members, they're going to have an impact at a large scale quickly, right? An entrepreneur who says, I know I'm going to start a totally sustainable 100% environmentally friendly food service company. But their impact at the beginning might be this small and they may never grow to that scale. So we need both because the small entrepreneur is going to try out new ideas. They're going to be really flexible and agile and nimble and be able to, test out new concepts. But to be able to have that kind of impact at scale quickly, we need those large companies to have those intrapreneurs driving that change too.
Nancy, I never actually considered what you were saying. So a great entrepreneur can go to a massive company and have such a big impact instantly. But if you're an entrepreneur trying to start something, you might never get to that scale of 1,000 employees or 10,000. I never thought of that. So that's a great point. Now I want to ask you a few questions because I know you're an expert in this field. Why do you feel some leaders resist change? And give me a tip on how you can actually get people to be more forthcoming with change within an organization.
So, I mean, leaders resist change because they're human, and and as humans, we're not really hardwired to love change. So, one of the things that I teach the entrepreneurs I work with is for them to flip their mindset around resistance. So, I think you said, a lot of your guests are athletes, some of your listeners are athletes, and so many of them are very familiar with the concept of resistance training, right? Where resistance makes us stronger. We intentionally use resistance. And so when we think about leading change, resistance oftentimes is a very good thing, especially overt resistance, right? Because then we can do something about it. What we don't want is covert resistance, that sort of behind the scenes undermining of our change efforts.
So with
But
that,
yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, because obviously with that, I think with change comes growth. So the people that really find that exciting. So if I put myself in a very awkward position where I know it's difficult, I don't know what I'm going to do here, I find it very exciting. And it's when I get my juices flowing. I'm very excited to go to work because I think new information, new decision, new neuro pathways. I'm going to become better at this. I'm going to learn from this, and it's going to keep us sharp and it's going to keep us on top of our game. But not everyone's as welcoming to that, especially if you're an entrepreneur. It takes people a lot longer to welcome change and resistance. What are some of the tips that you give your entrepreneurs or the people within a large organization to be more warm to these ideas or this change?
Well, so I don't necessarily teach people who are resistant to change how to be more open to change. I mean, in some ways I do. The intrapreneurs have to be open to change themselves, which oftentimes we love the idea of change, but we don't love changing ourselves, right? Like we want the result of the change, but oh, you mean that means I need to do something differently myself? Oh, well, wait, no, 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 no. I thought that meant you had to change, right? So I do teach that a little bit, but more what I teach folks is how can they use the resistance they encounter to the change they're leading to make their idea stronger, to illuminate their blind spots. And I've actually identified 3 common types of resistance to change in organizations and give people tips on how to overcome them. So, for example, one very common type of change, I'm sure we've all encountered these people in our lives, are those status quo defenders, right? These are the folks whose identity is often tied very closely to whatever the current way of doing things is. And because of that, when we're criticizing the current way or proposing that we need to do things differently, they can feel attacked personally.
Because it's their idea personally, or they've come up with a concept.
So think about the status quo in an organization. And perhaps if this is the process, the way we've always done sales, or the way we've always delivered service to our client, or at least for the last 10 years, and I'm the VP of sales and I designed this system 10 years ago, and it's been working just fine for 10 years. And now you're telling me we need to do something different. Well, or even if they didn't design it, but if they've been implementing it, right? If they've been part of the current system for 10 years or 5 years or 100 years,
Towards it, they've invested in it.
yeah, they feel like, oh, when you criticize this, I feel like it's an attack on me. And so we want to be very careful as leaders of change that we're saying, you know what? This system we've been using for sales for the last 10 years is great in so many ways. Look how well it's served us up to this point. And there are some pieces of this we might want to carry forward, but there are some things we're going to need to change. And so we can invite, so first of all, we don't want to be overly critical of the status quo. And we can invite those people who are those status quo champions, those defenders, to help us identify what are those elements that are valuable that we do want to carry forward. What are the consistent pieces that as we build the new system, we want to preserve and protect? And so that can be one way to involve them in creating the new system and help overcome their resistance.
Yep. So that, okay. So basically, don't take it as a personal attack if someone created the system or worked within the system and feels invested in it, either time or resource or both. It's very, very careful. I always think it comes down to approach. And if we get people included, and exactly what you said, ensure that this has served us well, we might want to take some of this forward. I think that's very important. Other than crushing someone's idea and their thoughts and their work, I think you'll have a much better effect. They always use the old saying, you get more bees with honey. So I think it's very, very important that you communicate better. What's
the second one are the what ifers. So these are the folks who, whenever they hear an idea for change or a proposal for change, they're like, oh my God, these are the doomsday planners, right? Well, what if we do that and we lose all of our clients? Or what if we do that and everyone quits? Or what if we do that and the world comes to an end, right? And I can be very optimistic. I'm always probably a little more optimistic than I should be about the likelihood of something succeeding. I think that's a characteristic of entrepreneurs, right? Um, I'm very open to change as well. And so I might not see some of the blind spots I have about things that actually could go wrong, potential pitfalls that I'm just oblivious to. And so these what ifers can be very important for people like us, for people like me. I need these folks in my sphere. So what we can do to help overcome that type of resistance is to invite them to do some scenario planning for us. Great. Go as dark as you can possibly go. Imagine the worst possible case that could happen if we move forward with this change. How likely is that to happen? Okay, maybe it's 50% likely. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. If it did happen, what would we do? Help us come up with our plan. So you really play to their strength of thinking of all those things that could go wrong.
Go wrong. And we call them the chicken littles in Australia. So they think of everything that can go wrong. But the beauty of it is, I always use that as well, because in investing, because we are some investment real estate people, they tell you 100 reasons why not to do it. And I listen to them, I write down all the reasons, and I go to an expert and say, show me how to insure to mitigate against these risks. And I proceed and make It's the same sort of a process, because you need these people to be thinking that way, because they're going to think the worst every single time. They'll document it. And what you said, an entrepreneur being over optimistic, for me, I see there's a way if I'm breathing, I'm going to do this. I can make it happen.
Right.
Sometimes I don't think of the other alternatives. So someone that actually sees that, I think, is a good yin to the yang of someone that goes, anything can be done, as long as I always think there's action. Because if you don't take action, nothing happens. So what you said, hit the mark on that. It's a good balance. And the third point is?
The third one I call the yes, no-ers. So these are the folks who, sit in our office or in the team meeting, and we're outlining the change that's going to happen, and they're nodding their heads. Yes, yes, I'm on board. And then they walk out the door and they do the complete opposite. So you think they're with you, but then they act in the opposite way. So there are actually 4 subtypes to this, and I won't go into each of them, but it's what we want to do with these folks is distinguish if this yes, no flip-flopping is a result of lack of will or a lack of way. Because if it's a lack of will, like the stallers, for example, so we see these folks in big organizations, in big companies, but especially in government sometimes. These are the people who they're like, I've been here for years before you showed up. I'm going to be here for years after you leave. I'll just wait you out. You'll get bored. You'll get frustrated. You're going to give up, either give up on the change, or you're going to give up entirely and leave. And then I can just go back to doing things the way I've done them. So they're stalling. They're just kind of waiting for you to get frustrated and leave. So for those folks, we want to make sure that there are clear consequences for not acting, right? If they're not going along with the change, there are consequences for that. They just can't drag their feet as long as possible.
Clean directives. And I think a good way to measure that is timeframes. So there's accountability measures at the end of the meeting. Well, when I finish my meetings, I actually go through and say, summarize this. Who's the champion to this? What's the time frame? Let's have an interim meeting, a very quick debrief. When are we going to see some forward movement? What's the ETA? I think that keeps people on point when you put those things in your business. I found that for me.
Yeah, definitely. And if it's a lack of way, in other words, maybe what we're asking people to do is not what their experience, background, and training has prepared them for. They were hired to do things one way, and now we're asking them to do them a different way. And they really want to do it, but they just need a little bit of skill building or training or support. And so how can we unearth that, especially if they're not maybe forthcoming with that because they're a little embarrassed or they think they should know how to do this. So how can we as leaders be in close contact and communication and really unearth some of those training needs, and then provide that support and that skill building so that people are able to actually follow through on the commitment to change?
Of course, because obviously too, some people say yes to not disappoint you, but you need to understand as a leader of any organization, Do they have the skill set? And are they comfortable enough to communicate or convey that they don't? And you should be open enough to ask the right questions and to make sure that they feel safe to communicate. Hey, you know what? I really want to do this, but I don't understand well. Can you assist me or can you help me? Can you do some training? I think that all comes down to communication. And it's very, very important that it goes both ways, that you're
Yes.
communicating openly with your team and vice versa. Now, I wanted to ask you a few more quick questions, if I may.
Yes.
Putting a lot of great content, Nancy, but I'm obviously mindful of your time as well. What do you think and do you believe about goal setting?
About what? It's the Australian accent.
Yeah.
Uh,
What's your thoughts around goal setting?
Goal setting. Yes. So many of us are goal setters, but not many of us are goal getters, right? So I think it's easy to get excited about something we want to achieve and then get less excited about what it's actually going to take to get there. So I'm a believer that, first of all, goals should be measurable and outcome oriented. So I don't like goals that are things like expand our client base or grow our team. I want to know expand by how much, grow our team by how much.
Specifics and measurable.
I like to have numbers. Or if it's not a hard number, I want to know, describe to me what that looks like when we've achieved it. How will we know when we're there? So we've got those descriptions.
Metrics around it. Because with
Yes.
metrics, how do you know? Because I
Right.
talk a lot about this. And I know you speak a lot about this, Nancy. I want to ask you one more further question. What are the 5 C's of change leadership?
Well, the 5 C's of change leadership are credibility. So first of all, we have to be credible leaders of change. So if we are not open to change, it's going to be hard to convince others that they should be. We need to have clarity in our vision. If we need to be able to describe what that looks like when we've achieved it. We need to have communication. So for all of those reasons that you've illuminated throughout this conversation. Congruence. Are our actions aligned with our words? Are all the signals, I call them artifacts, all the little things we've left behind in our organizations that tell us what we really value, how things really get done around here, what really matters? Are those aligned with the change that we're leading? Or are people getting mixed messages throughout, or processes that make it really hard to get things done? So there's too much friction. And then the last one is commitment. This is not easy work. It doesn't happen overnight. Are we committed? What are we doing to replenish our commitment, to recommit as we're leading change? How do we assess others' commitment? How do we enroll them in a commitment to the change? And how do we sustain that over time?
Action. Obviously, no matter how good, I always say the smallest action is more powerful than the greatest thought. It's all about,
Absolutely.
and it's so important. And being congruent, I always say the best example is that, and I use this a lot with my 4 kids. I want my kids to do as I do, not do as I say. Because if you lead by example and you epitomize what you're saying as a leader, I would like you to be punctual. I'd like you to run to this format and you do it to a T. It's a lot easier for people to follow that example than just sitting on and I use the barking orders, but not actually doing it yourself. I don't think there's any merit in that. And also you're not going to get buy-in from your team, are you?
No. Or they're going to be so confused. Is this change really happening? Or is this really what we're doing? Or are we doing this other thing? Because I'm seeing this other thing all the time, right? So it's very confusing.
Now you have a new program, 30-day program that helps people get more focused. Can you tell me briefly about that? And how could somebody get in touch with you as well? I'm going to put all the links in the episode below so they can. But can you tell me a bit about your 30-day program, please, Nancy?
Sure. This is something I created in the early days of the pandemic last year, and people have continued to find it so helpful that I'm continuing to make it available. It's called Shift, the 30-day Change Leadership Survival Kit. And it really is a survival kit. So every tool, every tip is super practical, immediately applicable, relevant to the problem of the hour for these times that we're facing. And it comes delivered in an email with a 3 to 6 minute video message, some journal prompts, and one action item. So this is something that in less than 10 minutes a day, you can get everything you need to survive the change that we're all living through right now.
Basically small, it's practical, it's bite sizes with one useful tip which you can implement. And I think it's never ever been more important. And especially, I guess, I'm actually from, as you know, Melbourne, Victoria. So our lockdown went for so long, stage 4. And I think what's been tested is our resilience as entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, but more importantly, as human beings. And
Yes.
I've been super proud of all the business owners in our state and the people, because I think we've done a great job in Victoria, Australia, and the world for that matter.
Mm.
And I think resilience has become probably one of the hottest topics due to COVID. And I think it's going to continue to be such an important thing. So thank you for bringing that 30-day program out. For all my listeners, please look at the links below where you can follow it. Nancy, it's been awesome. Are you ready for the quick fire round?
Let's do it.
All right. Now, do you have any pets?
I do. I have a cat. His name is Dasher.
Beautiful. What's your favorite color?
Pink.
Pink. What's your favorite TV show?
Oh, goodness. Well, I just started watching Downton Abbey. So I don't know that it's my favorite TV show, but it's what I'm watching right now.
I feel compelled to ask, do you like Seinfeld?
Do I like Seinfeld? I watched it when it was, live, when it was popular. I'm not a rerun obsessed Seinfeld fan.
All right, I'm going to let you pass on that one, Nancy. iPhone or Android?
I'm sorry?
iPhone or Android?
Oh, iPhone.
Now, who was your role model growing up?
I would say both of my grandmothers, for very different reasons, but they gave me the complete holistic package of the woman I wanted to be.
I love hearing that when you see the family values passed down. It's very important and it's beautiful. Describe yourself in 3 words as a teenager.
Oh, do you want my mother's description of me as a teenager?
We can go.
Well, I'm the oldest, so I would say I was probably stubborn, assertive, and caring, all at the same time.
Beautiful. One item that you can't leave the house without, not including your phone.
A bottle of water.
No, I've never had that answer before. Give me one pet peeve, something that annoys you the most.
Being late.
I'm a time Nazi as well. Now, best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be the best version of yourself.
Love that. Now, you've shared a lot of great takeaways in this episode, Nancy, and on behalf of my listeners, thank you very much. Can you give me 2-3 key takeaways that you want people to take from our time together from this podcast?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One, resistance makes us stronger, makes our ideas better, and it illuminates our blind spots. So try to be open to feedback, to tweaks, to the pushback that we often get. And probably secondly is what I just shared with you, the best piece of advice I ever got, which is to always strive to be the best version of yourself. So one of my favorite mottos is always in beta. How can I always improve, always learn, but still be naturally Nancy?
That's beautiful too. I always say be a better version of yourself every day, one small step every day. Just compete against yourself. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much have you enjoyed this podcast?
11.
Thank you very much. Nancy, it's been an absolute privilege having you on our show. Thank you very much. To all our listeners out there, we'll put a copy of a 30-day program so you can follow the link and see where you can get it. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you, Chris.